Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, January 20th, 2011. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week we take a look at the results of our 6th Brew Your Own magazine Basic Brewing Radio Collaborative Experiment. How do different mashing and lautering techniques affect your home brew? If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter. I'm Basic Brewing, all one word. On Facebook, I am at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. And our show page on Facebook is facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we appreciate your support. Don't forget our associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. You can now find our Basic Brewing iPhone and Android podcast apps on their respective stores, and we're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, too. Well, we got a lot to cover, so let's just jump right in there. A few weeks ago, we asked you to help us out with our Brew Your Own magazine Basic Brewing Radio Collaborative Experiment on comparing mashing and lautering techniques. And Chris Colby, editor of Brew Your Own, and I tasted some of the results together, and then we took a look at the data. Well, Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
This is experiment number 6. The 6th in the series of the Brew Your Own magazine Basic Brewing Radio collaboration experiments, and I can't believe it. In fact, we got together to do some tasting over Skype last night, and we've done so many that we had problems remembering all of the experiments. Could have been our memories, or could have been the beer. I'm not sure which.
A little bit from column A, maybe a little bit from column B.
So what are we doing? What is our experiment? What have we asked brewers out there to undertake this time?
Well, in this experiment, we wanted to do a test of the different popular lautering methods. When you make an all-grain beer, you crush your grains up and you add the hot water to them. And then at some point, you need to get the sweet wort separated from the grain solids. And there's a couple different ways that people do this. The basics are continuous sparging. You add sparge water while, continuously as you're draining off the wort. In batch sparging, you collect the wort in 2 or sometimes 3, usually 2 runoffs. What was the other one? Brew in a bag. You dunk the bag and lift it out. And finally, no sparge. You just make at some point, either early in the mash or late in the mash, you have a very, very thin mash and just run off your entire volume of wort in one big runoff with no sparging.
So in this experiment, we basically said pick at least 2 of these, do the same recipe with those 2 methods, and then compare the results. And we had 5 brewers who actually did this, and I was pleased to get 5 brewers because what we were asking people to do was essentially to dedicate 2 brew days to us, and all the time and the money and the effort to do that, and we got some interesting results, and I participated as well. And what I did was I started with brew in the bag, and then with that I had a water to grain ratio of about 2 quarts per pound. And I got my results from that. And then I did a batch sparge session where my mash thickness was about 1 1/3 quarts per pound. Then I looked at those 2 results and I said, well, there's a difference there. So let's see if it was the thinness of the mash. And so I went ahead and I did another batch sparge session with the same 2 quarts per pound as the original brew in the bag, compared that result, and then I went and did a 4th one with fly sparging using 2 quarts per pound. So we'll get to the results of that in a little bit. But what I did was if you listen to the previous show with the blueberry experiment, I enlisted Andy Sparks and Casey Lohman and Jen Royer to test those two beers back to back. And so while we were there, I brought out these 4 beers that I brewed. I didn't tell them anything about it again, and I had them taste and compare and contrast. And let's go back in time a bit and listen to how that went.
This is Andy.
Casey Lohman. Jen Royer.
Okay, all right. Because this is a different episode. Okay, so what I've done is I have poured my 4 batches of beer for the Brew Your Own magazine, Basic Brewing Radio Collaborative Experiment number 6. This is the same recipe brewed 4 different ways.
Wow.
So, your thoughts, Andy?
My thoughts, this was really tough. It makes it easier to know that they're basically supposed to taste identical because they really are very, very close. I struggled. I smelled them each separately and worked on the aroma for a while. I struggled. Maybe number 4 is a little different. I don't know. I mean, I went back and forth, and I struggled to find a difference. They all smell really good, nice and hoppy. Then I went to tasting them, and again, it's really tough, you know. And we've had a few beers. We tasted a couple beers earlier, as you said. And, you know, so it's tough. These are really close.
I agree with Andy. I think they're all very close. The one that I sat back and said I didn't like as much was number 2. For some reason, that one came off as a little bit more bitter to me and a little less aroma. And I don't know why. And they're very... I'm talking minuscule difference here, but I set this one back as a sign that was not as good as the rest of them, and I don't know why, and I could be completely wrong.
Okay, I don't know if this is a hop experiment, but that's what I'm focusing on here because they're all very hoppy beers. Right when you poured it into my glass, number 1 and number 4 to me had the best aroma, and 2 and 3 were kind of, you know, they were hoppy, but, you know, not a blow me over great aroma. And I also thought that number 2 was more bitter, like it had a real bitter aftertaste. And number 3 was it kind of had the same thing, but not as strong. Like number 2 came out like more real piney, maybe.
That's what I thought too. Number 2 was piney and less on the aroma side and more on the bitterness side.
I just grabbed a taste of number 2, and I was like, wow, that's not too bad.
Well, let me clarify. I think they all taste very good. They all have this hoppiness that I love. I'm just trying to be picky.
So you've gone back and you've tasted, Andy. Do you taste number 2 being more bitter or not?
Not really. But they're so close, and the differences are minuscule, and it's really tough. It's a lot easier, actually, you know, judging contests because the beers are different. Where these are so similar with the hop profile and the malt profile. Yeah, I mean, one beer could have been, you know, sitting in the sun a little longer. You know, it could have been just an adjustment in bottle conditioning or something. It's so small.
What about body? Any difference? Did you pick up any body differences between the beers? Since should we give you a second to go back and taste again? Let's concentrate, you know, on the mouthfeel this time instead of the aroma and the flavor and all that. Just how it feels on your tongue. See if you can pick up any differences between the 4.
I think 3 and 4 seem a little fuller than the first 2, but it might just be because I'm marching through them in that order, you know.
But they don't, from your perception, none stands out as more watery than the other.
Right. There's not one that's like, wow, this is very viscous, very thick, very full-bodied, and wow, that one's kind of dry and or watery. No, they're pretty close.
They're insanely similar. It's hard to say. Like, if I picked up on a small thing, it would be exactly that. It's like, I don't know as far as body goes.
I don't really get a difference, but I have to say that I like the first one the best. Maybe that's because I always start with number one. Maybe I should go backwards and see. That's what I'm going to do now.
I'm sorry to put y'all through this. Okay, let's talk about astringency. Is there any of them that is more, sort of
Maybe that's what's going on with number two. Maybe that's what's going on with number two. Is it an astringent thing and we're perceiving as bitterness?
But maybe I just put an idea in your head.
Maybe. Yeah.
So we're talking about kind of an iced or a sort of an iced tea kind of a, kind of a
real strong iced tea. We'll give you that kind of fur on your teeth effect.
Yeah. So did you pick up any astringency differences between? I mean, it is a difficult task because they're all hoppy pale ales,
right.
so that might mask some stuff.
It's a fairly bitter beer, and that's typically is going to give you that kind of a same effect of aggressive astringency. So they all have that to some degree. I'm about halfway through the set, so the first two,
I'll leave you back to your work. I'm trying to think of other things that, there's no color difference. No. You picked up on no appearance differences at all.
None of them is more cloudy than the other one. They all have the same color. If you swirled them around, the cups, like change positions, I wouldn't be able to put them back in order. There's no way.
I'll agree. I've been keeping them in very careful order, and I keep thinking, okay, astringency, maybe I see a difference in these. And I keep gravitating towards number 4, but then I'll taste number 2 and number 1 and not taste that much difference. But if I was pressed to say most astringency, I would say number 4. But that is from a minuscule and very small opinion as far as that goes.
Interesting. Are there any other criteria we should be looking at, Andy? As far as I guess they all poured with a similar amount of carbonation, and
they look the same. You could have been if you had been pouring this in a room. I wouldn't know they're different beers. I just wouldn't. Yeah. You would expect between even two batches that they would be more different than this, and I congratulate you, James. Homebrewing, it's hard to be consistent, and you've done a pretty good job with 4 different batches.
And I did different stuff, so.
Which we have apparently not picked up on. They're all very good. I really like the flavor of all of them. They're all nice to me pale ales.
It's a very good beer. I just can't tell what's different between them.
So there's the results there. Yeah, we're back.
We're going back in time. Oh, that was freaky.
And I think Einstein would, say something. We're probably older now because we went back in time. But the 3 of them really could not differentiate, at least not very much, between those 4 samples. And so what Chris and I did was last night we got together over Skype, and I gave Chris the opportunity to taste those samples, and I took the opportunity to taste them again. We didn't, thank goodness we didn't record, because we tasted some other beers as well. But what was your impressions, or what were your impressions of those 4 beers back to back? Now you didn't have the benefit of tasting them blind. You knew which was which because of the bottle caps. But what were your impressions?
Right. We tasted beers from 3 different people. I tasted the 4 beers of yours, not blindly, and I tasted Jeff Karpinski's and
Hank Rose.
Hank Rose beers blindly. But for yours, you had the 2-batch sparge, the brew in the bag, and the fly sparge, which were labeled. So I did know what they were. My initial impression was they were all very similar. We when we poured them out, we held them up to the cameras, and we looked for color, clarity, head retention, and that sort of thing. And on your 4 beers, I remember the color and clarity being pretty much the same across the board. I don't recall seeing any differences, although we did in some of the other tests. But on yours, color and clarity were the same. And then with regards to flavor and aroma, very similar across the board. You had brewed a IPA, nice hoppy beer, with if I recall, it's Maris Otter Crystal 60, right?
Mine was just the 2-row.
Just plain 2-row. You had some Crystal 60 and a
little bit of chocolate.
A little bit of chocolate for color. And the beers were remarkably similar. I remember thinking that the two batch sparge ones I couldn't tell apart in any way. They were, to me, the same beer. I thought the Brew in the Bag had a slightly improved flavor. I liked it just a touch better than the 2 batch sparge ones. And likewise, I thought the Fly Sparge one was just one notch above the Brew in the Bag. I thought that the flavors just seemed a little like fresher and brighter, whereas in the batch sparges it tasted just slightly, a little bit duller, a little cloudier flavor wise. And but as we discussed, because we tasted them, when they were first poured and they were cold, and even as they warmed up, and as beers warm up, they tend to start, any differences between them get easier and easier to pick out. But throughout the tasting, they remained all very similar. The differences I saw or tasted were slight.
Yeah, I couldn't, and again, I didn't do it blind, but I couldn't even perceive slight differences between those 4. And I'll give the nod to your super taster status, but
or maybe I hallucinated those differences into existence. But I don't think so. But yeah, I didn't. I didn't do it blind. So there was the possibility that I was reading something into those, but I don't think so. I think overall, certainly. One thing we discussed last night, we said, like, if you were at a party and you tried one of these beers, and then you went back and someone gave you a different one, we both said we probably wouldn't have noticed it.
Yeah.
Or almost certainly wouldn't have noticed it. It would taste like the same beer. You would have to be tasting them side by side and like looking for differences, and the differences were slight, even when you're focused on finding them.
And again, the differences were more on paper than in the tasting. The Brew in the Bag came out 1057 as the starting gravity. The first batch sparge 1048. The second batch sparge 1051, and then the Fly Sparge 1049. So, my technique of maybe of rinsing the grain and then squeezing the bag might have given an edge over the other 3. I'm not sure. But again, the grouping between batch sparging and fly sparging was very tight. And I don't have a fault spot on my mash tun, so I don't know whether that would have made a difference or not. But I was surprised that these beers were so similar and that the results were so similar. Now,
I was a little surprised after hearing the gravities that the Brew in the Bag one didn't stick out a little bit more as being higher in gravity.
Mm-hmm.
You would have thought that would have been, and maybe that was partially responsible for my, having a very, very slight preference for it over the batch sparges, that it was just, it was, a notch bigger.
Now, we asked, our listeners out there to take part in the experiment with us. And as I said before, we had 5 people take part. Jeff Karpinski, we know from the pages of Brew Your Own magazine and from this show as well. He's the guy that made my heat stick, and you've heard him on the show talking about electric brewing. But he took part, and he volunteered along with Hank Rowe of Tucson, Arizona, to send us some samples. So they each of them sent 2 of each brew sessions, and so I shared 1 of each with you, and we tasted those last night simultaneously. And we'll talk about our impressions in just a minute. Let me go over Jeff's results. Jeff Karpinski from Parker, Colorado. He did a single malt and single hop beer with Maris Otter and Chinook. He compared no sparge and fly sparge. The no sparge came out at 1051. The fly sparge at 1053, and he used his countertop Brutus 20, which again you can see. I think you can see it on the Brew Your Own website. So no sparge 1051, fly sparge 1053. That's pre-boil volume. Going into the fermenter is 1061 for no sparge, 1064 for fly sparge. No sparge finished out at 1015, fly sparge at 1013. So the fly sparge wort was slightly more fermentable, about 0.5% higher ABV, Jeff says. He says the fermentation was identical. Both are very clear when warm and both exhibit slight chill haze when cold, no detectable difference. He says his wife poured him a triangle test, and hard as he tried, he could not find any differences, even though the fly sparge is about 0.5% higher ABV. So he did a triangle test and couldn't figure out any differences. Fly sparge head was slightly longer lasting. Consistency of bubble size was the same, however. And I asked for conclusions, and he says, about what I expected. No sparge had an 82% efficiency into the kettle. Fly sparge had 87. My MLT having a stainless braid instead of a false bottom likely limited the fly sparge's potential in this test. On the other hand, the CB20's ability to recirculate the pre-boil volume, the full pre-boil volume through the MLT, minimizes the inherent inefficiency of no sparge. So he kind of he recirculated the entire wort through the system, so he got an advantage that way. He says, overall, I'm very pleased with my system and processes. For an hour shorter brew day, I'm getting what I truly consider to be the same beer. As for the beer itself, I love using smash beers at single malt and single hop beers for experiments, and I always use Maris Otter for its pronounced malt character. I'm also a big fan of Chinook hops, but until this smash, I'd never tried them with Maris Otter. I can't honestly say they're a great combo. Something's clashing on my tongue from the bottled samples. I didn't get that. I combined and kegged the balance of the 2 beers, where it does taste better, probably due to relatively low carbonation level I normally run my kegerator at. It's more reminiscent of an ESB off the tap. So we tasted those beers, and you tasted them blind, and I believe I did too, because later on Jeff sent an email. Jeff and Hank both sent emails later telling me which was which. But we found that the fly sparge beer was a bit more clear. We found that the no sparge beer was a bit hazy, not a tremendous amount more hazy, but I felt that the no sparge beer was a tiny bit more malty, and that the fly sparge beer was a little bit more crisp. But due to shipping, there was some yeast in the neck of my no sparge beer, so I'm not sure if that had an effect on it or not. So, do you remember what your impressions were?
Yeah, you might have been thrown off a little bit by the yeast in that one. Mine didn't have that problem, and when I poured them out, there was a slight clarity difference. The no sparge was just slightly cloudier than the fly sparge, and when I tasted it, I thought overall very similar. I had a slight preference for the beer that I later found out was the fly sparge beer. I just thought it tasted just a little crisper and cleaner. And I thought just the malt character was a little bit, just a little bit more. Trying to think of the right way to describe it here. So it wasn't necessarily maltier, but just the malt was I don't know, it just tasted cleaner, or brighter compared to the other one that had a slightly sort of muddied character. But overall, again, they were very similar. They were the kind of thing where if you're sitting down and you've got the two beers side by side and you're looking for differences, you can find it. But if you drank one of the beers, and then went back to the keg and someone had switched it and you didn't know about it and you got the other beer, I don't think you would have even noticed.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have.
Yeah, very, very, very similar. And I'm not sure that I would have been able to tell the difference in a triangle test. I mean, not a dramatic difference between those two beers.
Right. Yeah, it would have been interesting if we could have tried a triangle test blind too.
Now, Hank Rowe also sent us beers, and these guys volunteered. So, the three other guys, don't feel bad that you didn't send beers. It wasn't a requirement. This is the first time that that anybody has volunteered to do that. So we greatly appreciate that. Hank Rowe did fly sparging versus brew in the bag, and he did a Belgian blonde. And we will let's see. This was his first all-grain experience, and I have to say kudos to Hank for pulling that off. Both of these beers were very tasty. He did, let's see, Fly Sparge. The original gravity was 1048 for 5.5 gallons, and Brew in a Bag was 1055 for 5 gallons. And what I did was I adjusted. I said, what if you evaporated that extra half a gallon from the Fly Sparge? You'd have 1052.8, I think. So about 1053 for Fly Sparge, 1055 for Brew in a Bag. So very, very similar results there. And then the final gravity on each was 1010. So there's, 1055 versus 1053. Pretty close there, within the margin of error, I would say.
Sure.
He says that the color of each was a sandy yellow-brown, although much more noticeable presence of particulates in the Brew in a Bag. Cannot speak to this as one container. Talking about I asked for differences in the fermentation. One was in a bucket and one was in a carboy, so he couldn't directly compare those two. He said that he did a sampling with some friends, and they said that the Brew in the Bag had a citrus bouquet with a hint of orange. This also came through in the taste, somewhat sweet, light, and fizzy on the tongue. The Fly Sparge had a slightly more blended taste, less of the citrus aroma and orange. One of my samplers noted that because the citrus taste didn't come on quite as strong, that this beer would be more drinkable. He says that I asked for conclusions. And Hank says, I learned a great deal with this experiment. For one, I should have done the Fly Sparge first, as it would have given me a better gauge of how much water to use for the Brew in the Bag. I do believe that the significant factor in any difference in the taste of these two were due to the difference in water-to-grain ratio, as otherwise the end result came through very similar. Being new to all grain, I would definitely recommend Brew in a Bag to anyone who is considering trying to step into all grain for the ease as well as the cost efficiency. For me personally, my desire is for larger capacity. I generally brew 10-gallon batches. While I did read some who do use Brew in a Bag for 10-gallon batches, the process seemed like it would be more cumbersome due to the simple fact of the grain mass. Heavy bag. For going beyond that, as I'm looking towards, I do not see Brew in a Bag as a viable option for larger batches, though I would definitely use for smaller experimental batches. So they had tasted a bit of difference between the two as far as the flavor, and we tasted them as well. And what do you recall?
Well, I tasted these two blind as well, and I remember seeing the beer that later turned out to be the Brew in a Bag was slightly more cloudy. Overall, the beers were very similar. I had a slight preference for the beer I later found out to be the Fly Sparged one. I thought it was just a little crisper. I thought that the flavors in the other one were just a little bit muddied. But again, in a manner very similar to Jeff's beers and in a manner very similar to your beers, there was very little difference. There was, it was kind of interesting actually to taste 3 different brewers had done this experiment and come up with beers so similar in every case that it was interesting to see how you can switch your lautering method apparently as a home brewer and still brew pretty much the same beer.
Yeah. Yeah, the brew in a bag was, in this case, slightly more cloudy than the fly sparging beer. But, I don't know if that has anything to do. These were well-traveled beers.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that had something to do with it or not. But both beers were very tasty, and both beers were very similar, again. Again, with the triangle test, if we had the chance to do that, not sure if we could pick out, or not sure if I could pick out the difference between those two, but not what I would call a dramatic difference between those beers. Now we go to Dan Kirkman in Lake Villa, Illinois, who had a hoppy alt beer and compared batch and fly sparging, and he did a decoction mash with this one. He said he found the online BYO article on the process with an included recipe for an alt beer, and he followed that recipe. He says, although it may be a bit hoppy for that style, so I don't know if that's... Couldn't be your influence, could it be, Chris?
No, not me.
So he said that the volume and original gravity was essentially the same for each batch post-boil, 5 gallons at 1052, respectively. The batch sparge had a final gravity of 1011, fly sparge 1010. So, again, very close and within the margin of error, probably. No difference in color. Better foam on the batch sparged recipe, but I mistakenly pulled a smaller than desired first decoction for this batch and cooked it almost dry. Added some more mash liquid. Since the decoction was too small, the mash temperature didn't reach saccharification temperature when the small decoction was added back, and I had to do another decoction. Clarity was the same for both batches. Both batches had aroma that hinted of a Belgian ale. Smooth mouthfeel with an initial hint of sweetness that is quickly overcome by the beer's hoppiness. The fly sparge recipe was slightly drier than the batch sparge recipe. He said, I found the 2 beers to be essentially the same and will likely try batch sparging more often. I've only used fly sparging until now. I'll definitely try decoction mashing again. So there we go. Batch and fly sparging with his system, essentially the same. He's got a false bottom mash tun and boil kettle made from a used stainless steel half barrel. So he does have a false bottom. So no dramatic difference in Dan's results. But Andreas Schurmeyer from Export, Pennsylvania, did a best bidder, did no sparge versus fly sparge. Andreas he had a bit of a bit more dramatic a difference. He said no sparge. He had 3.2 quarts per pound of grain. Fly sparge 1.6 quarts per pound of grain. He has a 10-gallon Blickman Boilermaker mash tun with a false bottom and an auto sparge arm for fly sparging. Going into the fermenter, he recorded 1046 for no sparge, 1057 for fly sparge, and then no sparge finished out at 1008, fly sparge 1011. So, again, it looks like fly sparge was a tad more fermentable, probably, starting at 1057, coming out at 1011. No sparge starting at 1046 and ending at 1008. So, he gets more efficiency from fly sparging.
And he's definitely set up for it. I mean, he has got the false bottom and the whereas some of the other brewers like you, right? You don't have a false bottom, and
I've got the hose braid, but I've got the little whirligig, so I was able to sprinkle the water on the top.
But your lauter tun is more set up for doing
batch sparging.
Batch sparging.
Yeah.
And it worked with fly sparging, but there just wasn't that much difference.
Yeah, it wasn't that dramatic a difference. He says, go ahead.
It may be that for people if you've got a batch sparge lauter ton, it might not matter much if you batch sparge or fly sparge with regards to efficiency. But it seems to suggest, and we'd probably need more people to do this to really say, but if you're set up for fly sparging, you can probably eke out a little bit better efficiency than compared to batch sparging.
He
but
says
we only have his results on
Right.
that to go by, and we would need a couple more people to make a more general point.
Right. He says the no sparge beer had a little bit more of a pronounced hop aroma, while the fly sparge, I got some hop aroma too, but with a little bit more of the sweetness of the caramel malt coming through. On flavor, the no sparge has a pleasant taste from hops and a little bit of sweetness. Unfortunately, the fly sparge, I get a bit more of a sharp taste, sort of astringent. The bitterness, the no sparge beer I perceive to be more bitter than the fly sparge beer. For conclusions, Andreas says, I will change a bit how I will brew in the future. I will try to fly sparge more often, even though it takes a lot longer to do. I would like to get better at fly sparging, and maybe I can eliminate that sharp taste. I would also like to have a more reliable efficiency to create recipes from. So, the conclusion that we would jump to recklessly would be that that the reason that he got a better efficiency from fly sparging was that he over-sparged and therefore got an astringent off flavor because of the tannins from the grain. With the traditional knowledge, that would be what we would jump to conclusion-wise, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because if he's pulling out tannins, if he's tasting something astringent, that might mean he, just collected too much wort, over-sparged, and that would also, over-sparging, well, it makes your beer taste worse. It does make your efficiency go up. So.
But before we jump completely into that other conclusion, Christopher Owen from Louisville, Kentucky, or Louisville. Is it Louisville? Louisville.
You got me. Louisville.
He did continuous versus batch sparging. He did an American Pale Ale. He has an 8-gallon stainless steel kettle using, and it's got a hose braid. He's got a hose braid. Now, for original gravity, his batch sparge batch was 1058, fly sparge 1062. So a little bit better efficiency on the fly sparging, even with the hose braid. Batch sparge finished out at 1014, final gravity on the fly sparge 1016. So similar attenuation levels, 76% on the batch sparge, 74% on the fly. He says the batch sparge beer is slightly darker in color than the fly sparge beer. You may need a meter to know exactly how much, as it is subtle, but the bottom inscriptions in my glass are more obvious, reflecting light more brightly, and are easier to decipher in the fly sparge beer than the batch sparge beer. I'm curious if the extra color comes from more tannins being extracted and getting into the wort. He says initially the fly sparge or the fly batch was slightly cleaner and lighter. This may simply be brewhouse error, possibly as more suspended grist got through from having to repeat the Vorlauf process in the batch sparge beer. After fermentation, no real difference is detectable. There's also a slight haze in both beers from dry hopping. Both are equal in hop aroma and flavor. The batch sparge beer has a slightly dry, astringent sensation, the slightest bit, on the finish compared to the fly sparge. This may be consistent with the slightly darker color of the batch sparge beer, as it may be getting more tannins. For conclusions, Christopher says, I will continue to fly sparge as it is more efficient for me, resulting in more sugar in the wort. It also eliminates the risk of getting extra tannins in the wort, though some write that batch sparging reduces the risk of extra tannins. I will definitely fly sparge for extra pale pilsners, Helles, and the like. I imagine with dark beers, I wouldn't notice a difference. So that's the opposite side of the coin. Mm-hmm. He did the batch versus fly and got an astringent flavor from his batch sparge beer. So go figure.
Yeah, well, he was using a different setup, and what did he mention, that he had to recirculate something again?
Yeah,
he had mentioned something.
Yeah,
So
he
that
said,
might be due to that rather than straight batch versus continuous sparging.
yeah. So I don't know. This is another one where I was expecting the results to be sort of dramatic, especially in the efficiency. The wort of the collected gravity coming out of the mash tun. I was expecting to see clear trends, with comparing these mashing and lautering techniques, but we don't see that. And I mean, there are slight differences, but they're not across the board. And also on the characteristics of the beers, there doesn't seem to be dramatic differences between tasting, sampling these beers as far as a sensory perception is concerned.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting things I thought in the experiment, that in every case any differences were described as being small, or in some cases indistinguishable even by a triangle test. And that's you sometimes hear the opinion that homebrewers, given their small scale, could not brew the same beer twice in a row and have it taste the same, whereas this seems to pretty much indicate that not only can homebrewers do it, but they can do it and they can switch one of their techniques in the middle of the in the thing too, which to me was surprising.
So there's more of a fudge factor than we may allow.
Yeah, it seems. I would say this would indicate that you're certainly not, by picking any lautering method that you want, you're certainly not going to absolutely ruin your beer. In fact, the results would seem to say that they're going to be roughly equivalent.
Yeah. So looking generally at at our 6 samples here, it would seem that fly sparge is either equal to or has a slight advantage over batch sparging. Although in my case, my second batch sparge beer was a couple of points higher than my fly sparge beer. But and another trend is it seems like brew in a bag seems to hold its own as far as, as gravity is concerned and quality of the beer. So it kind of adds more credence to the the argument that brew in the bag is a legitimate brewing technique, not just a little flash in the pan kind of a trendy thing to do. So again, we're going to have to think about this some more for the article to kind of figure out what to write, other than try this experiment yourself on your own system. Take two batches of beer with the same recipe, boil it the same, add the same ingredients, ferment at the same temperature, just vary the one mashing / lautering technique, and see what you come up with.
Yeah, I think with the data we've collected, that's really all we can say right now. Is that we pulled up some very slight preferences, but overall, these different methods seem to, surprisingly to me, yield very similar beers, even though the method by which you make them is different. And I also think right now, if someone based on the results of this experiment, if you were trying to recommend a different lautering system for somebody, your best result your best advice to them might be just simply, look to see what you're best set up for. If you're set up to do fly sparging well, do fly sparging. If you've got a batch sparge set up or can make one, they're fairly cheap to make, go ahead with that. And if you'd like to try the brew in the bag thing, because you don't want to, you don't have the money to buy, a new mash lauter vessel right now, give the brew in the bag thing a try and see if you like it.
And another thing is personal preference as far as what you want to do. Fly sparging for me takes longer, and the results that I get apparently aren't that markedly different from either brew in the bag or batch sparging. So to me, having a shorter brew day or having a longer brew day is not worth the minute differences in these beers that we tasted, last night. I can't see that the extra time that I spent on the fly sparge batch paid off. I mean, you said that you had a slight preference for the fly sparge beer, but it wasn't night and day difference.
No, it wasn't night and day. It wasn't even twilight versus dusk. It was slight. I've been a continuous sparger or fly sparger since I started, and I'm going to continue to do that simply because that's what I'm set up to do. That's how I'm used to doing it. And now with my new fancy pants brewing rig, I just sort of let the pump do all the work while I sit there. So, if sparging takes a little longer, it's taking a little longer while I'm sitting in a deck chair, relaxing. So I'm not going to worry about that. But yeah, I was surprised with these results. I had my expectations, especially with brew in a bag. I sort of had the idea that was going to be making like cloudy beer with terrible efficiency, and I was surprised about that with the batch sparge versus fly sparge, and no sparge versus fly sparge. I expected the differences to be smaller, but I did admit I thought we were going to see some. I thought the batch sparge, I had a slight suspicion that we would see slightly darker wort, which we didn't see. And I thought, there's the possibility that you would taste some slight like oxidation with the batch sparge beers, and I didn't see that.
Well, there you go. Now we have to go back and go back to the drawing board and come up with our next experiment. So
yeah, we sure do.
I still have the list from the tweeters out there that I've shared with you, so that we can go over those and pick out our next experiment. But this has been fun again, Chris, and I appreciate your taking time again, and I appreciate your staying up late with me last night and sampling these beers, and then we pretty much worked together on a strategy to fix the world, I think.
Yes.
It's too bad we didn't write it down.
Only we could remember what it was.
All right, Chris, until next time.
Okay, James, we'll talk to you later.
Well, thanks again to Chris and to Casey and Jen and Andy Sparks of thehomebrewery.com for helping us out. Very interesting and not nearly as dramatic as I expected, frankly. To give you a more detailed look at the data, I've compiled the full reports from the 5 homebrewer participants into one PDF, which I will link to in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. And I'll also put it as an extra on the iPhone and Android app. So take a look at that yourself and see if you can spot a trend there. Or better yet, try it yourself and let us know what you find. I think it's a worthy experiment to kind of step out of your comfort zone there and try different techniques and see if you're doing, the right thing for your setup. Well, if you have brewing questions in the meantime, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can find our new DVD, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, on our website, and our 2011 Brewers Logbooks. We still have some of those. Check out our online store. Also, you can check out our other DVDs while you're there. Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits as well. We've got combo deals to save you a few bucks. And don't forget our shirts. We got those too. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them from us directly online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com associate link. We appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Handbook of Roman Imperial Coins, a complete guide to the history, types, and values of Roman imperial coinage. That sounds cool. And Americana Route 66, Grand Canyon, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and other landmarks stickers. It's also cool. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. And don't forget that link to the American Homebrewers Association or Brew Your Own magazine through our site, too. That's all until next time, everybody. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.